Hello, and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. This is our live streaming podcast at Absolute Trust Council, and I'm Kirsten Howe. I'm here with Madison Gunn today. Um, this is going to be just kind of a fun episode. Of a little while back, maybe a couple of months ago, we did an episode about estate planning lessons from celebrity estate plans more broadly, but Lisa Marie Presley died, and now, within days, there was an estate issue that came up in the press, and so we're going to focus on the Presleys today and estate planning lessons that we can learn from them. So I'm going to hand it over to Madison. She's going to kind of tee that up for us.
All right. Thank you. So it's a sad day. Lisa Marie Presley passed away at 54, very young, like her father, who was 42. Fortunately for us, it's a good excuse to have a whole episode of Absolute Trust Talk to discuss one of Kirsten's favorite topics. Because if you didn't know, she's a huge Elvis fan. Huge. And in this case, we're talking about the whole Presley family, or at least Elvis and Lisa Marie, and a little bit of Priscilla. What really triggered this was that Priscilla Presley filed a petition to challenge an amendment to Lisa Marie Presley's trust. So, yay, she had a trust. Boo, there's a challenge to it. And while Priscilla and Lisa Marie not getting along is not news in itself, I don't think they've ever gotten along. It's irregular that Priscilla would challenge Lisa Marie's estate, given that Lisa Marie's leaving everything to her children. I mean, that's kind of like the natural flow of things. Normally, your parents don't challenge that.
Right.
So we're going to discuss this further. But first, Kirsten's going to give us the Elvis backstory.
Right, because he is the king, and I am a huge fan, as Madison said.
And the kings always go first.
The
Watching The Crown, the queen always goes first. It's the rule.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, and I am a huge fan. If you haven't seen Baz Luhrmann's movie, which came out, I think, last fall, you need to go see it. Everybody who's listening, everyone who can hear my voice, you need to go out and see that. And I know we have a Monday team meeting. Every Monday we have a team meeting, and we kind of talk about what did you do this weekend. And the weekend that I saw that movie, I probably really embarrassed myself by talking for like 10 minutes about the movie, about Elvis, about all of that stuff. And the rest of my team was probably like, oh my God.
Well, to be fair, that is the only movie I've seen in the theater since COVID. Everything else we've strictly stuck to the drive-in, and that is the only thing that we are like, no, we can't listen to that in the car. We have to go to the movie theater for that. So
Totally
that's
worth
the
it.
only one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, on to Elvis Presley's estate planning, because the Lisa Marie story kind of starts with her father, Elvis Presley, of course. And there are some interesting lessons and points of discussion in the story of his estate planning. We'll talk about his plan first, and as we go along, we'll point out some interesting issues as we see them along the way. So at the time of his death, which was in 1977, Elvis's estate was estimated to be worth about $5 million, which I have come to understand is probably about $20 million in today's dollars. I didn't do that math. I don't know that that's true, but that sounds about right. It also sounds, to me, that's always sounded really like a very small estate for someone like the king of rock and roll, who worked for 25 years and was all over the place, sold millions and millions of records. So there's a whole story there, but we probably aren't going to go much into that. When Elvis died, he had a will, not a trust, which is not how we typically do things in California, because in California we're trying to avoid probate, and so we use trusts. Elvis didn't live in California. He spent a lot of time in California, but he lived in Tennessee, and it might be that their probate process is not so horrible as ours is here in California. So they use wills. Elvis's will established a testamentary trust which means it was a trust that was created after his death in his will, as opposed to what we do here in California is a living trust. You create the trust while you're alive. And he designated his father, Vernon, to be the trustee of that trust. And the beneficiaries of this trust after Elvis died, his estate was held in trust for the benefit of Vernon, his father, Elvis's grandmother, and Lisa Marie. So there were 3 named beneficiaries. And the trustee was to make distributions to them for their health, education, support, comfortable maintenance, and welfare, which is a little bit different from the language we use in California, but it's basically, to make sure that they're okay, they're taken care of. So the trustee is to hold on to all this money, $5 million, and make these distributions. What's one thing that's interesting, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, Madison, in addition to those 3 beneficiaries, the trustee, which remember is Vernon, his father, had discretion to provide funds to other relatives, and that's what the will said, relatives who are in need of emergency assistance in those same categories: health, education, support, comfortable maintenance, and welfare. So what do you think about that?
That's weird. I mean, I am aware that he had an aunt that lived at Graceland until the 90s. So there were definitely other people living in the house. And so maybe that's their version of, allowing people to live in the home after his death. I mean, it's a very gracious, no pun intended. Well, maybe pun intended, a gracious way of allowing your family to keep living in your home. It's broad.
Yeah, it wasn't specific to people who might be living in the home, which is Graceland, in case you've been living in a cave for the last 50 years. And he doesn't say, he leaves it to very broadly other relatives.
Who's going to pop up? Who's driving up from Tupelo to get in on that money,
Yeah. Are they going to have to do some kind of paternity test,
and that didn't exist.
That's true too.
Yeah.
But I think if we'd had a client wanting to do something like this, we probably would have want to put some boundaries around it, make it a little more specific. Who are you talking about? Maybe put some kind of dollar cap on it. Emergency for comfortable welfare. When does an emergency arise like that? I think maybe we would have narrowed that down a little bit.
I mean, what if somebody had an accident, needed to be airlifted and gone to this hospital? I mean, that money at that time could have been gone very fast.
Yep.
If it's spent on something like that.
Yeah. It just seemed a little open-ended for a situation where you have a minor child who now doesn't have a father. You need to be sure that she's going to be supported. Of course, Elvis didn't know he probably didn't know he was going to die so young. But anyway, the other thing I was, leaving it open to other relatives when everybody knows how Elvis was surrounded by family members and friends who just kind of mooched off of him. He supported so many people. He had this huge entourage of people.
And Vernon was involved in that. So he's going to have all the same advisors.
He's going to have all those same people around him. And they're people who, honestly, in my humble opinion, weren't really caring about Elvis a whole lot. They let him. Well, he died of polypharmacy. He died of having 14 or 11 different drugs in his blood system on the day he died. And everybody knew it. Everybody around him knew it, and they didn't do anything to stop him. So this just seems like not a good idea. These people are going to come to Vernon and ask for money, and I don't know. We would have tried to talk him out of being so broad and so unspecific, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Fun fact, one of Elvis's Memphis Mafia entourage was Lisa Marie Presley's date at the Golden Globes 2 days before she died.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Right. Jerry Schilling. Yeah.
not a great look.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so that's what the trust said, and Vernon was the trustee. That didn't last for all that long because Vernon died just a few years later, and so did the grandmother. So just a few years later, Lisa Marie became the sole beneficiary of that trust, aside from that, other relatives provision. And the trustees after Vernon died were three people or three entities: Priscilla Presley, which is Lisa Marie's mother, Elvis's ex-wife; the National Bank of Commerce, which is Tennessee Bank; and Joseph Hanks, who I think was a CPA, the family's CPA. And so those three were co-trustees after Vernon died, and they were appointed apparently in Vernon's will. So something there gave Vernon the right to appoint trustees to replace himself, which is interesting.
You think because this was a probate, you could get your hands on Elvis's will?
Well, I did find Elvis's will online, a document that purports to be Elvis's will, but it was not a signed version. It looked like it could have been, it was on legal
Yeah.
size paper, and it was in that old-timey font that typewriters had, because it would have been done on a typewriter in 1977, and it was written maybe about 6 months before his death. But anyway, so I don't know how that came about, but that brings us to the issue of, trustees.
Yeah.
And how do you replace a trustee? How do you change the trustee? Madison, you want to chime in on that?
Typically when you write a will or a trust, it doesn't really matter which document it is, you have a list of successor trustees. And it could very well be that his successor trustees Vernon didn't agree with, and he then had the ability somehow in the will to use a power of appointment in his own will to go around that, and name his own. I mean, if Colonel Tom Parker was named as the alternate executor behind Vernon, then I can see why he might want to change that. And maybe it's just a way of changing it without having to go to court or something of that nature. But typically the document itself would name, first I want my trustee to be Vernon. And then if he can't, it would be Priscilla. And if she can't, then it would be so-and-so. And you just put 3 or 4 in there so that there's, options.
Right.
It makes it a lot easier.
Right.
And you get to choose.
Right. But so the other point of it is that if there is some change of the trustee that needs to happen, you have to first read the document and figure out what are we supposed to do? What's the procedure here? What are we allowed to do? Who can do it? So, we don't know if that was Elvis's will that I saw, but somehow these three ended up being the co-trustees after taking over after Vernon died. It was kind of unusual. I thought that he chose his father as the trustee in the first place. I don't know. At that point, Vernon was probably still in his early 60s. Maybe that wasn't such a bad idea. Usually you want to go younger.
Yeah, and you would think there would have been an alternate, given that Lisa Marie is for certain going to outlive Vernon, and
Her
it was
grandfather.
until she was, a certain age, so you would think that there'd be an alternate there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so these three trustees take over, and they actually did a pretty good job of managing the assets. I think possibly under Vernon's guidance, the trust was running out of money, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that Graceland is very expensive asset to manage. It's not an investment in the stock market. You gotta pay the property taxes. You gotta clean that
Keep
thing.
up
You
the
gotta pay
maintenance.
the
Yeah.
maintenance. If it needs a new roof, all of that would come out of the trust. So they were losing money because Graceland was so expensive. But these 3 new trustees, they formed a corporation, Elvis Presley Enterprises Inc., and that enabled them to hire some really good managers. And the other thing they did was they opened Graceland up as a tourist attraction. So instead of being a money pit, it became a piggy bank, and that really turned that, and a lot of other things really turned it around for the family.
That's very similar to what all of the landowners that have estates in England have done in order to pay for those old estates.
The very expensive castles, and
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
They have tours. They live there, but they still
they
have
still
tours
have
and
to,
gift shops, and they
right.
maintain the gardens, and people, come tour or they film there, things like that.
Yeah, that's
So,
right. They can license it out for movie sets and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's what they did. They turned Graceland into basically a museum. And then they went around and they purchased a bunch of adjacent properties so that they could be in control of all the gift shops and all the um, various.
Surrounding development, you don't want a neighborhood with the fence up right up against
Yeah.
Graceland.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to have a parking lot and things like that. So, um, okay. So they turned that $5 million declining estate into about $100 million by the time Lisa Marie was 25, which is when that trust was to terminate. So now we have Lisa Marie, 25-year-old, $100 million in assets. What do you think about that?
And once Elvis died, she grew up in Hollywood with her mom, so probably not a great idea. Not particularly
Oh,
humble
that's true.
beginnings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whole other
Yeah.
issue of who was she going to high school with? Who was she hanging out with? What what kind of influence?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they didn't have a good she was a rebellious teenager. She was all kinds of
Right.
trouble, so she was not surrounded by great people, and they knew that well before 25.
True. But they didn't know that at 9,
No,
which
they
is
didn't.
when Elvis died. Yeah. She was only 9 years old.
Yeah. I don't know if the case law or the probate code uh, changing changing that, modifying an irrevocable
Yeah,
trust
yeah.
for that purpose, but
Yeah, although
that'd have been a big fight
that
though.
yeah, she would have
Yeah.
been fighting that. So, you know, they didn't know. They didn't know how much money it was going to be. They didn't know, she was only 9 years old. It was hard to predict, but I don't know. In retrospect, yeah, $100 million to a 25-year-old who's been a bit of trouble, um, probably not a good idea. But
Yeah, I mean,
that's
she
easy for
lost
us to
it.
say
She
in
spent
retro.
it. And
Yes,
then and then she sold 85% of the company and then spent that.
right. So she right.
So
She
she lost
sold
100
her
million like twice.
she lost almost all of it, except she still owns Graceland, or prior to her death, she still owned Graceland, and she
Yeah.
still owned Elvis's, all the memorabilia, all the awards, all that stuff. Um, so she managed to hang on to that, but she did burn through a huge inheritance
Yeah.
before her death. Okay.
And I think a combination of that was bad management and,
Oh yeah.
poor financial skills. It's not 100% her fault, but
It's not 100% her fault. No, but
the
she didn't know enough to surround herself with better managers.
well,
There's maybe that's it.
she had a good teacher, you know.
Yeah,
It's all
yeah.
she saw, right? I mean, you only know what you've experienced. So,
Right. Right. So uh, as did her father, she burned through a lot of money.
yeah.
And here we are, Madison. Let's talk
Yes.
about her estate plan, which is the excuse for this whole episode.
Right. So when Lisa Marie died, she was her estate was in debt $4 million. So that was what she owned. I mean, she owns Graceland, but she was in debt $4 million. That probably did not include the valuation on Graceland, thought being that's not
It's
going
not
to
on
be
the table.
sold, not on the
No.
table. But the day she died, her estate became flush with cash because there's about $25 million in life insurance policies. They're 25, not sure exactly what was lapsed or not, but about $25-30 million in life insurance policies came in for her. So there's something to fight over now. So
Exactly.
So of course, luckily Lisa did execute her own revocable trust in 1993. She didn't do a will. She was a resident of California, so she did a revocable living trust. Someone gave her some good advice. And the interesting thing is that she named her mom and her business manager at the time, Barry Siegel, as co-trustees at that time, which is very unusual to have a revocable living trust and you not be the trustee of your own trust. So I guess maybe she was a little self-aware she shouldn't manage her finances. So I assume she just had a credit card and the trustees paid the bill. I mean, that's kind of how that would work. And in 2010, she restated or amended that trust in its entirety, and she did not change the trustees in that amendment. I'm pretty sure she had children right around there, so she probably updated the trust to add her twins.
To add the children.
Yeah. After her death, Priscilla discovered that there was a 2016 amendment that changed the trustees to be Lisa Marie's adult children, Riley and Benjamin Keo, as co-trustees. Benjamin died in 2020, as we know, and that would leave Riley as the sole trustee of the trust, presumably, to hold the money for her half siblings, the twins, that are still minors. The petition, she's arguing that the amendment is not valid for a couple different reasons. One, it was just a PDF. There is no physical copy. There's no original anywhere. And that the date was added electronically on the PDF, like almost like edited afterwards. Priscilla's name is misspelled. And she says Lisa Marie's signature is not her normal signature. And now for you and I, nobody would even notice that. But for someone who's been signing autographs for her 42 years, they know what her
People would know.
signature looks like. Yeah.
Right.
So they're going to know. And then the amendment was also not notarized or witnessed. That's not necessarily a requirement, but it depends on what the trust document says itself. One of the things that we do know the trust says was that anytime an amendment is made, you have to deliver that amendment to the current trustee of the trust. And in this case, Priscilla wasn't aware of it. So it clearly was not delivered to the
her.
trustee. On a side note, which none of the news articles or petitions said, if she was changing the trustees of the trust, wouldn't all the assets have to have been retitled in the name of the new trustees? So clearly that didn't happen. None of the action occurred after,
Right.
like they normally would have if you're changing trustees. One of the things in favor for Priscilla is that in 2018, 2 years after the alleged amendment, Lisa Marie sued her trustee, one of her trustees and business manager, Barry Siegel. And at that time, in those legal documents, in her legal documents, it names Priscilla and Barry as co-trustees, which indicates that maybe she didn't change the trustees.
Maybe she didn't change the trustees. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
it's
really
not.
interesting.
Yeah. And I don't, and to be fair, if Riley doesn't dispute it, it's not going to be a big deal. The interesting thing is in that 2018 lawsuit, Barry Siegel says he was going to be resigning or is no longer the trustee of the trust. And no one has produced any resignation documents. They still say that those two are, Barry and Priscilla, are co-trustees. So even though she sued him, and a part of that was because of her mom, one of the corporations was paying Priscilla a salary and she was not an employee. So they were arguing about that. And so for like $1 million. And so that's kind of a big deal. And how someone who might have settled a fraud claim would still be her trustee.
Still be your trustee.
Is very weird. So despite all those red flags of her suing her business partner, He was still a
He was
co-trustee.
still a co-trustee as
Yeah.
far as we know. Yeah.
I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen any like chatter from him in the press or anything like that. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But so the crux of this conversation and why we really brought it up, even though it is news in this industry, but also for us as in estate planning attorneys, is that there is some current case law going on that matches this suit very well. So it's about amending your trust. And it's
Right.
important to follow the instructions in your trust document or have clear instructions in your trust document as well. And it's currently being litigated. The probate code says, if your trust says nothing, it defaults back to the
Is the
probate
probate
code.
code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The probate code says, and I quote, unless the trust instrument provides otherwise, if a trust is revocable by the settlor, which is the person creating the trust, the settlor may modify the trust by the procedure for revocation. So it's a circular response that doesn't say anything.
Right.
And there are 2 court cases that are currently pending in California. Remember, this is all the probate codes are different in all 50 states. So this is specific to California. There is Haggerty v. Thornton, where the California appellate court allowed settlers to use the statutory method of modification, unless the amendment procedure in the trust is exclusive. Meaning, if the trust doesn't say, this is the only way you can amend a trust and it is exclusive to this document, or, if it doesn't say that, then they can fall back on the code. And then there's another case, same level of court, in the appellate court, that says when the trust instrument, it's called Balistrary versus Balistrary, when a trust amendment specifies how the trust is being modified, that method must be used. And so that's mandated, even if it doesn't have the word
say exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, go ahead.
So we have these 2 appellate courts saying 2 different things. One says if it doesn't say exclusive, you don't have to consider it exclusive. The other one saying whatever it says, that's the exclusive method. And so 2 appellate courts, and now what?
So the Supreme Court has granted a review of one of them, the first one, Haggerty. But typically when the Supreme Court grants a review, they do what's called depublishing the case, meaning if we were to file a petition, we couldn't reference that case as support in our petition. But they didn't do that here. So there are 2 court cases that are viewed as law or persuasive evidence that you can use. So I could file one petition, another attorney could file another petition, and we can use essentially the 2 different cases to argue against each other.
Yeah.
And then what? So and the Supreme Court, we don't know when they're going to hear that. I mean, they announced it last spring. So who knows? It could be this year, it could be next year. They'll get to it when they get to it.
Okay, so 2 things there. First of all, we aren't litigators, so we would never be filing a petition like that. That's for our friends, the litigators. But it is an important drafting point, which is I think that, and we've had cases recently where after our settler died, amendments surface, and there's an issue as to whether it's a legitimate amendment or not. I think it's a important point to maybe nail down that any amendment has to be done this way and only this way, and whatever that means, whatever the attorney and the client feel comfortable with. But just to be really clear so that we don't have these weird things popping up with people advocating that they are amendments if they don't comply with the procedure.
I mean, we always advised before, but certainly now, please do not DIY amend your trust.
Yeah.
I mean, they go to litigation just because you crossed something out in the document and wrote someone's name in a margin. I mean, that can be construed as an amendment. I mean, maybe not anymore, or maybe not in a couple of years, but not after this.
Yeah.
But, there are things, especially if your trust is silent as to how to make the amendment. So it's important to go back to that drafting attorney or find an attorney to help you amend the trust. For sure.
Very good point. And make it really clear, I think, what is an amendment and what the procedure for doing an amendment is. So, we can eliminate some of the litigation.
Yeah.
The point of doing good drafting is to hopefully avoid litigation. We don't want to have our families duking it out in court.
Yeah. It's one thing to duke it out because they don't agree. It's another thing to duke it out because the attorney didn't do a great
The
job.
document is
Yeah.
not clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would anticipate that Lisa Marie's trust issues are going to be settled privately. So we probably won't get an answer out of anything because, that's just how celebrity stuff is. But the rest of us are just going to be sitting in the wait and see approach, waiting for the Supreme Court of California to make a ruling. So, all the attorneys are probably going to be updating their language that they use in their trusts for the time being, which is, it's not always a bad thing. It spurs change, then that's good change. So
Yeah, no, we're always trying to make our trusts better. And new laws come down and we go, oh, I need to address this. So yeah, and that's why, our trusts we have trusts that walk in the door that are like 30 years old and they're 10 pages long. And I will tell you, the trusts we write today are not 10 pages long.
no. And to be fair, that's what I tell clients when they complain because they're like, I don't want to read a 70-page trust. And it's like, it's like that for a reason. And all that legal jargon and the things that are in there, the random trustee powers that are like, this doesn't apply to me. It's there because someone went to court before you. And it is now something that we need to put in the document because it's a what if. I mean, that's really what our job is. We're what if attorneys.
To anticipate all the things that could possibly go wrong.
Yes.
That's what makes us so fun at parties, is that we're just always looking for what could possibly go wrong here.
My little light bulb just went off with, is that why I have anxiety? Why I always go to the worst case scenario in my brain?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
So we have a little bit of we have one. Oh, well, let me see if there's any questions in there. I do have one question at least. Let's see. So the first question, and I'm going to ask you, because since you know all the things about Elvis.
Well, I probably know more than you, but
yeah, that's
I don't
true.
know that I would say I know all the things.
So
okay,
we talked about Lisa Marie owning Graceland, or her estate owning Graceland, and selling 85% of the corporation that was making money on Elvis's likeness. But what about his music? I mean, that seems like that'd be a lot of money.
Right. And that's part of why I said $5 million.
Yeah.
That's all he had when he died. Well, I mean, a big part of that is he sold his music before he died. And I use the word he very lightly. Colonel Parker and he sold his music to RCA, and in return for some deal, but they basically gave all their rights to RCA. And then some of his music was still owned by Sun Records. Remember, he started out with Sun in Memphis. His very first records, That's All Right, was on Sun, and they still had some of his music, but they sold that also to RCA, and now RCA has sold it to somebody else. But yeah, he didn't own the music, so Lisa Marie doesn't own the music.
Yeah, and those continue to make money, obviously. Brand endorsements, the movie. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, he had to pay. Baz Luhrmann had to pay for all that music.
Yeah.
And he didn't pay Lisa Marie.
No. So that is a whole other topic, and we don't practice this type of law, but the concept of royalties and ownership of your own copyrights. I mean, you see it with Taylor Swift. She didn't know that her first album was not owned by her. She owned, she owns the copyright on the fact that she wrote the music.
She wrote the songs.
She wrote the songs, but she didn't own her master recordings, and she went in and re-recorded everything.
Made that whole album over again.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We have XM radio in our cars, and everything now says Taylor Swift, Taylor's version. So all the
Yeah.
companies, Sirius and iHeartRadio and all that, they all have stood behind her and they're no longer
And they're
paying
not playing the old
royalties
one.
to the
Yeah.
old one. Yeah. So,
That's awesome.
the industry sticks together in that way. And then we have a couple trivia points that I just thought were fascinating. I mean, we can talk about how many albums he had, how many movies he was in, how many number one hits he had. I mean, we could talk about that stuff all day. But most people are aware of that he was a prolific
Oh,
creator
yeah.
of music and actor. Which, I mean, he just sang in his movies. It's not
He
like,
appeared in
he
many,
appeared in
many
a lot of
movies.
movies. Yeah.
It's a stretch sometimes to call him an actor,
Yeah.
but
But there were a couple that I really enjoyed. One was that Elvis Aloha from Hawaii, which I'm not 100% sure if that's a concert or a movie. Maybe you know.
I think it
Uh,
was like a concert. It was a
yeah, okay.
concert that was
They filmed.
in those days, I guess, simulcast.
Yeah,
It was broadcast simultaneously. Yeah.
right. And so it was seen in 40 countries by more people than who watched the man's first walk on the moon. So more people watched Elvis's Aloha from Hawaii than watched,
Watch Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon. So that's was impressive, and most people probably didn't believe that walk on the moon business back then. I mean, it's just was brand new, so it was an
Yeah,
unheard of thing.
there were skeptics.
Yeah,
There were conspiracy theorists even
yeah,
back in the 60s. Yes.
yeah. And then the other one was that he never performed outside the U.S. other than maybe during the military, but he never performed outside the U.S. except for a few shows in Canada. And that was most likely because the Colonel Tom Parker, who was his manager, was an illegal immigrant. And they didn't really discover that. He hid that for a long time. Like he dropped his accent, changed his name, all the things.
He held he came from the Netherlands, I think.
I think, yeah.
Is where he was from, and he had family back there, and he just kind of gave them the stiff arm, like, don't come here, don't cause trouble for me, I have a life.
I feel like the movie alluded to him fleeing the Netherlands for some reason, and I don't know necessarily know why.
True.
Yeah.
But another aspect of that too, in the days when Elvis was really touring, he was playing in Las Vegas for a month or two at a time, and then he'd go on the road around the country. I mean, this was in the 70s. I think also Colonel Parker wanted him to stay in Las Vegas as much as possible because Colonel Parker liked to gamble.
Yeah.
And in Las Vegas, they were cutting him some nice deals. And I'm sorry. I hope, I don't want to disparage anybody, but that I think is pretty well documented. So
anyway. I saw a good tidbit that Vegas didn't want Elvis at first because he was too provocative, which is hilarious.
Oh, not too provocative.
Because it's not like that was Vegas of the 2000s that was rebranded for family fun. It was still very much mobster, casino time. So it was just, that's hilarious to me that they were like, yeah, we don't want Elvis. He's too suggestive. I'm like, but the showgirls are not, so.
I know. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I'd never heard that. Okay. All right. Well, anything else, Madison, on the topic of the Presleys?
I'm sure we could keep going, but for the sake of, everyone's sanity,
all our listeners,
yeah,
they have probably had enough. All right. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Those of you who stayed to the end, especially, and indulging me in my little frolic, I guess is what I would call it. We really enjoy having you listen and watch, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. Don't forget to keep an eye out for our next live episode in 2 weeks. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcouncil.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.